Hi, today I'm reading a short story after I have just finished up Animal Farm yesterday. Um, I figured I'd do a few short stories, and today's story is about a dystopian, well, it's a utopian world, but it exists it exists only because of a very dark cost. I haven't read this story, so I don't know if my description could do it total justice, but it's not a long read. And hopefully, if you're not that into it, it can be relaxing. And maybe we can talk about it after. Um, Hi, Alyssa. I don't know if you enjoy this kind of content, but hopefully, it's a nice story for you to hear. It's not that long. It probably will be maybe 30 to 45 minutes. And then maybe I'll do one more story after this, but not sure. So I'm gonna try to dive right in. This story is called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and it is a story by Ursula K. Le Guin. She she's the writer of this short story, and we're gonna get into it. So let's see. With a clamor of bells that set the swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of the boats in harbor sparkled with flags. In the streets between houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens and under avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous, old people in long, stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. All the processions wound towards the north side of the city, where on the great water meadow called the Green Fields, boys and girls, naked in the bright air, with mud-stained feet and ankles and long, lithe arms, exercised their restive horses before the race. The horses wore no gear at all, but a halter without bit. Their manes were braided with streamers of silver, gold, and green. They flared their nostrils and pranced and boasted to one another. They were vastly excited, the horse being the only animal who was adopted our ceremonies as his own. Far off to the north and west, the mountains stood up half encircling Omelas on her bay. The air of morning was so clear that the snow, still crowning the 18 peaks, burned with white gold fire across the miles of sunlit air under the dark blue of the sky. There was just enough wind to make the banners that marked the racecourse snap and flutter now and then. In the silence of the broad green meadows, one could hear the music winding through the city streets, farther and nearer and ever approaching, a cheerful faint sweetness of the air that from time to time trembled and gathered together and broke out into the great joyous clanging of the bells. Joyous! How is one to tell about joy? How describe the citizens of Omelas? They were not simple folk, you see, though they were happy. But we do not say the words of cheer much any more. All smiles have become archaic. Given a description such as this, one tends to make certain assumptions. Given a description such as this, one tends to look next for the king, mounted on a splendid stallion and surrounded by his noble knights, or perhaps in a golden litter borne by great muscled slaves. But there was no king. They did not use swords or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect that they were singularly few. as they did without monarchy and slavery, they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. Yet I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have had a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the reason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man, nor make any celebration of joy. How can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were in fact happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. Oh, miracle! But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds in my words like a city in a fairy tale, long ago and far away, once upon a time. Perhaps it would be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids, assuming it will rise to the occasion, for certainly I cannot suit you all. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, etc., they could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here, floating light sources, fuelless power, a cure for the common cold. Or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter. As you like it. I incline to think that people from towns up and down the coast have been coming into Omelas during the last days before the festival on very fast little trains and double-deck trams, and that the train station of Omelas is actually the handsomest building in town, though plainer than the magnificent farmers' market. But even granted trains, I fear that Omelas so far strikes some of you as goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, bleh. If so, please add an orgy. If an orgy would help, please don't hesitate. Let us not, however, have temples from which issue beautiful nude priests and priestesses already half in ecstasy and ready to copulate with any man or woman, lover or stranger, who desires union with the deep Godhead of the blood, although that was my first idea. But really, it would be better not to have any temples in Omelas, at least not manned temples. Religion, yes. Clergy, no. Surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about, offering themselves like divine souffles to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh. Let them join the processions. Let tambourines be struck above the copulations, and the glory of desire be proclaimed upon the gongs. And, not unimportant point, let the offspring of these delightful rituals be beloved and looked after by all. One thing I know there is none of in Omelas is guilt. But what else should there be? I thought at first there were no drugs, but that is puritanical. For those who like it, the faint, insistent sweetness of Druze may perfume the ways of the city. Druze, which first brings a great lightness and brilliance to the mind and limbs, and then after some hours a dreamy languor, and wonderful visions at last of the very arcana and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as the exciting pleasure of sex beyond all belief, and it is not habit-forming. For more modest tastes, I think there ought to be beer. What else? What else belongs in the joyous city? The sense of victory, surely, the celebration of courage. But as we did without clergy, let us do without soldiers. The joy built upon successful slaughter is not the right kind of joy. It will not do. It is fearful and it is trivial. A boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere, and the splendor of the world's summer. This is what swells the heart of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. I really don't think many of them need to take Druze. Most of the processions have reached the green fields by now. A marvelous smell of cooking goes forth from the red and blue tents of the provisioners. The faces of small children are amiably sticky, and the benign gray beard of a man, a couple of crumbs of rich pastry are entangled. The youths and girls have mounted their horses and are beginning to group around the starting line of the course. An old woman, small, fat, and laughing, is passing out flowers from a basket, and tall young men wear her flowers in their shining hair. A child of 9 or 10 sits at the edge of the crowd, alone, playing on a wooden flute. People pause to listen, and they smile, but they do not speak to him, for he never ceases playing and never sees them, his dark eyes wholly wrapped in the sweet, thin magic of the tune. He finishes and slowly lowers his hands, holding the wooden flute. As if that little private silence were the signal, all at once a trumpet sounds from the pavilion near the starting line. Imperious, melancholy, piercing. The horses rear on their slender legs, and some of them neigh in answer. Sober-faced, the young riders stroke the horses' necks and soothe them, whispering, "Quiet, quiet. There, my beauty, my hope." They begin to form in rank along the starting line. The crowds along the race course are like a field of grass and flowers in the wind. The festival of summer has begun. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement under one of the most beautiful public buildings of Omelas, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between cracks in the boards, secondhand from a cobwebbed window somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused tool room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but actually is nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits hunched in the corner farthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there, and the door is locked, and nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes, the child has no understanding of time or interval, sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several people are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come close, but peer in at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water jug are hastily filled. The door is locked and the eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining. "Eha, eha," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It's naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores, as it sits in its own excrement continually. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest, and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding, and most of those who come to see the child are young people, though often enough an adult comes or comes back to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there's nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the sunlight out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done, in that day and hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms: to exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single, small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one, that would be to let guilt within the walls indeed. The terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind of word spoken to the child. Often, the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox. They may brood over it for weeks or years. But as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality, and to accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child, and their knowledge of its existence, that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyous music as the young riders line up their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. Now, do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes, also, a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down the village streets between the houses with the yellow lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. And that's it. I told you it was a short story. I saw your comments, by the way. I apologize that I don't respond right away, but I try to make it enjoyable. Okay. Hold on, let me read your comments. Yeah, they're having a great time on their Drews. I think it's just it's kind of one of those, well, what's the saying? The needs of the many over the needs of the few. What is happiness without suffering? Oh, yeah, my dogs have to listen to the absolute worst dystopian stories. Oh, okay. Yeah, I heard about it too. I'm seeking out dystopian stories. And I was curious about this because it really left it open-ended as to it was kind of mysterious the way they wrapped it up. Obviously, the story is called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and at the end, the narrator explains the literal people who walk away with such mystery, as if it's kind of unfathomable. I guess to go towards the unknown, well, it doesn't really help, does it? Yeah, that could very well be. And what do we think about that? What do we think about the people who walk away? Because they're not quite fixing it. They just don't want to. They just possibly don't want to benefit from such an inhumane system. But does that matter? It seemed incomplete the way she said, they go towards a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I can't describe it at all. True. Even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. She's so damn proud. She or whoever is so damn proud of this city of happiness. It it makes it seems to make so much sense that this be the system, because I don't think she seemed too empathetic. Did the writer have an idea of the place? Was she too lazy to make something up? Or is it intentionally ambiguous? It's hard. The moral high ground is to say, yeah, get that child out. It's just so terrifying to really imagine an entire society making that decision, and the people who don't go along with it just leave, which isn't exactly helpful. But I guess there's not more architecture in the story to know if people could break the child out, do a heist, or if they could start convincing others. But then, is that desirable? I guess people who walk away, it's when you just choose not to participate in it and benefit, but you also are not choosing to change the system. And it kind of makes them, it doesn't make them morally better than the people who embrace the system, benefit from it. Without knowing the author's intentions, I don't want to read into it, because then I'm projecting my own themes and values onto it. That's a good framework. All I can say, there's a lot of there's actually a lot of commentary by the author before and after. I skipped it because it's outside of the story itself. It feels like she purposely left a lot of ambiguous, and my question is, was that done because it wasn't relevant to her point, if the story is an allegory? Because she just wanted to introduce the reader into a mysterious dystopia? Or is the story not well fleshed out? That's true. I guess it really is just for the purpose of presenting a moral dilemma. Let me see. I'm going to look at the afterword. Oh, here. Readers ask me to tell them what the story means, or where the ones who walk away are going. Or they tell me what the ones who walk away should do instead of walking away. Some are indignant, angry, because the condition on which the happiness of everyone in Omelas depends is so cruel and so arbitrary. Why do the people of Omelas accept it? Why don't they rescue the child in the closet? The answer to that question is in the story, because all the well-being of everyone else depends on the suffering of the child. The moment the child is rescued, everybody else will begin to suffer as hopelessly as the child does now. That's how things are in the story. It's the rule of this game. You can only play a game, chess, soccer, parable, if you follow the rules. Games and stories are imitations of life, ways of playing at life, sometimes ways of learning how to live. Some of the rules may appear both cruel and arbitrary, but if you want to play the game or live the life, you have to follow them. Most of the questions I get about Omelas, however, I can't answer. They're based on the assumption that the story itself is the answer to a question, and want me to explain it to them. But it isn't an answer. It's a question. I didn't think the question up. I invented this particular way of asking it, yes, but I'd found it asked by two writers I read earlier in my life. It sank deep into my mind and came out again at last in the form of a story. In Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan Karamazov tells his brother the story of a little girl, horribly abused by her own mother, locked in a filthy outhouse, weeping, beating her heart with her tiny fist in the dark and the cold. And then she goes on to summarize this story, which I might read, so I don't know if I want spoilers. And she goes on about Dostoevsky. So, you don't care about spoilers? Okay. Okay then. I'll get a little bit into what she says. She says she's quoting Dostoevsky's character, who asks a woman and the readers, would you consent to carry out the plan? Would you accept the happiness on that condition? And she answers no. James thinks that a specific moral emotion or response would immediately, inevitably, lead us all to the same answer. The intensity of the question is sharper in Dostoevsky, but the answer is just as clear in James' quiet language. My story presents the same plan, on the same condition, and involves the reader even more directly in considering the question, but asks the question without offering any answer to it. All we see is that, even when so much is to be gained for so many at such a comparatively tiny cost, some of the people of Omelas, but only some, refuse the bargain and turn their backs on the city of happiness. In talking about the meaning of a story, we need to be careful not to diminish it, impoverish it. A story can say different things to different people. It may have no definitive reading. So, there we have it. It poses an impossible question. You know, it's almost like the train tracks question. There's not gonna be an answer that feels good. There is just one that's maybe, arguably, a little better than the other. And the only thing I can really take away from it is what could we possibly be allowing in our daily lives as a society that creates this sort of conundrum without us really wanting to face it directly. I'm just unclear about the rules of the fictional universe and if the story can therefore be compared to ours, like you're saying. That's true. It's really... I would say it aims to leave a lot up to interpretation, but there's not quite too much left to interpret, I feel. You could say it's an allegory for how we, in developed nations, profit from cheap labor from other nations. If you know the story of the US interfering in South America to keep the banana prices low, it's similar to that. Yeah, there's plenty to compare it to. And I think it speaks to... It also speaks to the mentality of if you're in a group that accepts it, it's easier to just blend in with that group. And vaguely speaking here about topics like that. But yeah, I don't have much more to extract from it. I did have one more short story to read, even shorter than this one, and I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's Harris and Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. And the only slightly annoying thing is to switch over to that story. I am going to end this stream and start a new one just so it's easy for my VOD to separate itself. So I will wrap this one up, and then if you want to stay for the next short story, it's about the consequences of all people being completely equal in society, and what that looks like in it from a dystopian lens. But it's a very short story, and I'm gonna switch over to that one now. So if you wanna stick around for that one, then we could talk about that one too. But there was an implication that there was a supernatural balance aspect to it, like some force or deity making it so the kid suffering is like a sacrifice that ensured prosperity. Yeah, and you know what? If you look at it from that lens, it makes it easier for people to distance themselves from the choice that is forever being made, you know? And that's a disturbing thing, I think. You know what? I'm a fan of projecting themes. I don't, sure, authors have their own purposes and their own meanings, but whatever you take from it, whatever we take from it, I think we're entitled to. So yeah, it is vague. There's an opening for magic that makes it hard for me to be like, oh, okay, this is about society. I like where your mind goes. So I also want to see what your mind goes on in the next story. I'm going to switch over now, okay? So I'm not just like abandoning, but I'll be back in literally less than a minute. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed the story.